the persistent, almost liturgical rhythm of human respiration under the vast, indifferent canopy of the cosmos serves as the backdrop for one of the most enduring and profoundly enigmatic biological processes, dreaming. For millennia, these nocturnal voyages into the utterly bizarre have been relegated to the realms of prophecy, Freudian symbolism, or mere synaptic misfirings, a neurological housekeeping exercise conducted in the dark. Yet, the confluence of cutting-edge physics, advanced neuroimaging, and deeply anomalous anecdotal evidence is beginning to suggest a narrative far more radical, one where the ephemeral landscape of the dream state is not merely a byproduct of a resting brain, but potentially the very mechanism by which human consciousness interfaces with realities beyond the three spatial and one temporal dimension we perceive, hinting at the elusive fourth dimension. The year 2023 marked a critical, though largely whispered within elite scientific circles, pivot point in this understanding, catalyzed by monitoring technologies sensitive enough to map quantum fluctuations within neural architecture. What scientists observed, during intensive monitoring of subjects in a state classified as deep dreaming, was nothing short of a violation of established physical laws as currently codified in the Standard Model. Specifically, the brain activity, when filtered through advanced magnetoencephaly systems calibrated to detect femtosecond-level variations in magnetic fields generated by neuronal firing, exhibited a distinct, coherent pattern of oscillation. This was not the typical gamma-wave synchronization associated with heightened conscious processing, nor the slow delta waves characteristic of deep, non-REM sleep. This was something entirely new, characterized by a form of quantum oscillation that, according to current understanding of space-time rigidity and causality, should simply not be maintainable within the warm, wet, noisy environment of biological tissue. These oscillations seemed to momentarily decouple the processing architecture of the self from the strict linear progression of time, suggesting a momentary liberation from chronological constraints. Imagine a running stream suddenly exhibiting a section where the water flows upstream for a measurable duration without external force. That was the analogy whispered among the physicists reviewing the preliminary data. If consciousness, tethered to the brain, could momentarily generate physical signatures that defy the local laws governing energy and momentum, the implication swings violently toward a mechanism allowing the observer to slip free from the constraints of time itself, the very fabric of space-time acting as the fourth dimension that we navigate linearly. Further compounding this already unsettling data was the astonishing convergence of thousands of independent, subjective reports gathered globally. Across disparate cultures, languages, and socio-economic strata, more than 100,000 individuals submitted detailed, verifiable accounts of precognitive dreams. These were not vague premonitions, they were sharply delineated glimpses of future events, a specific traffic incident at a particular intersection, the exact final score of a sporting match, or the precise phrasing of an unexpected news headline, all reported with a predictive accuracy that defied statistical probability, boasting a margin of error no greater than 3 seconds. When the brains of these individuals were subsequently subjected to high-resolution electroencephalography, particularly during periods immediately preceding the self-reported precognitive dream phase, a consistent, highly anomalous frequency signature emerged across the board. This frequency was precisely 147.8 Hz. This specific harmonic, 147.8 Hz, appeared to be the telltale electrical signature of a mind briefly tuning into a future timeline, a frequency potentially resonating with the structure of a future state of the universe, a state that exists as a potentiality until actualized in the present. The clandestine work undertaken at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, often shrouded in layers of institutional secrecy and defense funding repurposing, pushed this boundary from observation to active, albeit accidental, experimentation. Within a heavily shielded laboratory environment, researchers monitoring subjects undergoing extremely deep, controlled REM sleep, a phase we will return to shortly, registered an unprecedented spatial distortion signature in the background quantum foam, detected via highly sensitive superconducting quantum interference devices. During moments corresponding to the peak of the subject's reported dream narrative, which often involved scenarios of complex decision-making or encountering alternative versions of themselves, the analysis suggested a phenomenon akin to momentary superposition across space-time coordinates. It was as if the informational locus of the individual consciousness was momentarily accessing, or perhaps even manifesting within, multiple simultaneous space-time configurations, essentially, a fleeting, non-local awareness spanning various parallel universes where every possible choice made by that individual had played out. Researchers, Observing the data readouts that suggested one consciousness simultaneously occupying multiple points in the manifold of space-time, were forced to confront the possibility that dreams were not merely internal hallucinations constructed by the brain's plasticity mechanisms, but rather the direct, unfiltered experience of the mind moving through the topography of higher dimensions, slipping through transient imperfections or cracks in the conventional four-dimensional barrier. The immediate cessation of the experiment, marked by a panicked internal memo citing existential risk to the research paradigm, speaks volumes about the terrifying nature of this glimpse beyond the veil. To contextualize these epoch-making discoveries of the early 21st century, one must rewind, not just decades, but to the foundational moments when the systematic study of sleep even began to acknowledge the profound significance of the dreaming state. The historical genesis of modern sleep science is often pinned to a deceptively simple yet ultimately revolutionary observation made in 1952 by a graduate student at the University of Chicago, Eugene Aserinsky. Aserinsky, utilizing rudimentary electrooculography, the measurement of eye movements, began systematically charting the sleep cycles of human volunteers. His discovery was initially met with skepticism, even amusement. He noted that during certain segments of the night, even when the subjects appeared deeply quiescent, their eyes beneath the closed lids began to move with startling, rapid intensity, darting back and forth as if tracking an invisible, high-speed action sequence. This phase, which he termed rapid eye movement sleep, or REM, proved to be the crucible of the dream experience. Crucially, when EEG readings were taken concurrently, the brain activity during these REM bursts was shockingly reminiscent of a fully alert, awake brain, characterized by fast, desynchronized electrical patterns. This suggested a profound paradox. While the physical body was locked in a state of near paralysis, the central processing unit, the mind, was operating at a level of frenetic activity, perhaps even exceeding its waking baseline. The brain was not resting, it was engaging in a separate, intensely demanding form of computation. The immediate follow-up investigation sought to determine the functional necessity of this highly active, yet physically quiescent, state. This led to a series of ethically questionable, yet scientifically crucial, dream deprivation experiments. The protocol was brutally straightforward. Whenever the monitoring equipment signaled the onset of REM sleep, the subject was abruptly awakened. This process was repeated mercilessly throughout the night. The overwhelming consensus from the awakened subjects was unambiguous. Nearly 100% reported having been in the middle of a vivid dream when interrupted. Contrast this with awakenings during non-REM phases, where subjects frequently reported having dreamt nothing at all, or only fragmented, meaningless sensations. This established a near-perfect correlation. REM sleep is the biological substrate for the majority of human dreaming. More importantly, the consistency of reports confirmed that dreams were not random epiphenomena but rather meticulously orchestrated, biologically mandated sequences, suggesting an evolutionary or psychological purpose too significant to be accidental. The necessity of this nightly narrative construction became brutally evident in subsequent, more disturbing animal model studies. American researchers, often employing methods now considered inhumane, utilized laboratory rats suspended on small platforms surrounded by water. The design was engineered to exploit the natural muscle atonia, the temporary paralysis, that accompanies REM sleep in mammals. The moment the rats entered the REM state, their supportive platform offered no purchase, and they fell into the water, immediately rousing them and forcing them back onto the platform, only to repeat the cycle. After repeated, chronic deprivation of these essential dreaming cycles, the rats began to exhibit catastrophic neurological decline. Their spatial memory collapsed. They could no longer recall the location of hidden sustenance. They lost the learned routes through complex mazes they had previously navigated flawlessly, and even short-term recall of immediate actions disintegrated. The conclusion, stark and unavoidable, was that without the periodic, structured immersion in the dream state, the very mechanism of memory consolidation and recall begins to fail on a massive scale. Dreaming, therefore, is not optional. It is the scaffolding upon which stable, long-term memory is constructed, the mechanism by which ephemeral daily experiences are forged into the permanent architecture of the self. This principle was further refined and dramatically quantified by landmark research conducted at Harvard University in 2010, focusing specifically on learning consolidation. Volunteers were tasked with mastering an exceptionally intricate three-dimensional maze, task requiring significant spatial reasoning and motor skill acquisition. Following the learning phase, one group was allowed a short period of rest, while another group was permitted to nap. The crucial differentiator was the analysis of their sleep architecture. The subgroup whose naps were confirmed to contain significant, uninterrupted REM periods exhibited a performance improvement in navigating the maze that was statistically an order of magnitude greater, 10 times better, than those who had merely rested or spent equivalent time in quiet contemplation while awake. This demonstrated, with quantitative rigor, that during the dream state, the brain functions as an inexhaustible, tireless instructor, a neurological drill sergeant running complex simulations and rehearsal loops. Every learned pathway, every new concept absorbed during the day, is replayed, stress-tested, and reinforced hundreds, perhaps thousands, of times within the compressed theater of the dream. It is perhaps no surprise, then, that the greatest leaps in human ingenuity have frequently occurred not in the sterile environment of the laboratory, but within the fluid logic of the subconscious narrative. The history of science is punctuated by these sudden, dream-born revelations. Consider the foundational crisis in organic chemistry concerning the structure of benzene. In 1865, the German chemist August Kekulé was wrestling with the seemingly intractable problem of benzene's composition. The established understanding suggested a linear chain, yet the chemical properties defied this structure. It was only after reportedly experiencing a vision, a snake consuming its own tail in an Ouroboros fashion, that Kekulé experienced the necessary cognitive leap. The structure was circular, a closed ring. This dream insight fundamentally rewrote the understanding of aromatic compounds. Even more dramatically, the Russian chemist Dmitry Mendeleev, the architect of the periodic table, claimed the entire, meticulously ordered arrangement, the sequence of elements dictated by atomic weight and recurring chemical properties, came to him fully formed in a dream. He reported seeing the elements arrayed as if in a disciplined military parade, each finding its precise, correct station. Waking instantly, he transcribed the vision, and the resulting table proved perfectly predictive of undiscovered elements. These instances underscore that dreams are not merely passive replays, they actively synthesize, reorganize, and generate novel structural insights that challenge the very foundations of established knowledge. If dreaming is so vital for memory and creativity, what happens when the controlled, internal mechanism of sleep breaks down? We encounter the frightening reality of sleep paralysis, a phenomenon that has fueled centuries of folklore about incubi and night hags. You awaken, fully sentient, your sensory apparatus fully engaged, you perceive the room, the temperature, the ambient sounds, yet you are utterly immobilized. The desperate, primal urge to move, to scream, to escape the perceived threat or sheer terror of confinement, meets only the deafening silence of bodily non-response. This is not supernatural abduction, it is a temporal misalignment in the brain's wake-up sequence. Normally, the process involves a coordinated restoration, consciousness reasserts itself, and almost simultaneously, the brain signals the pons and spinal cord to deactivate the muscle paralysis mechanism inherited from REM sleep. In sleep paralysis, the higher cortical centers responsible for awareness spring online first, while the lower brainstem centers responsible for motor control remain locked in their REM state disengagement. The mind is awake, lucidly aware, but the body remains tethered to the dream state's imposed inertia. The inverse mechanism, sleepwalking or somnambulism, reveals the complementary danger. Here, the brain fails to completely disable the motor controls during the transition out of REM or deep sleep. The resulting state allows the body to physically enact the complex narratives unfolding in the dream state, often with astonishing competence. Documented cases are legion and frequently terrifying, individuals preparing complex meals, engaging in detailed artistic creation, or navigating treacherous environments. A particularly chilling incident from 2008 involved a man in the United Kingdom who, while asleep, drove a distance of 23 kilometers, competently executing lane changes, signaling, and obeying traffic signals, until the subconscious command to stop was overridden by a real-world obstacle, resulting in a crash. Upon waking, the individual possessed no conscious memory of the journey, his body having executed a high-level navigational task driven entirely by the sleeping mind. Yet, the most compelling, and arguably most dangerous, frontier in dream research is the study of lucid dreaming, the state where the dreamer achieves full meta-awareness, recognizing the artificiality of the environment and, critically, gaining executive control over the dream narrative. Initially celebrated as the ultimate form of psychological freedom, the ability to fly unfettered, to summon any landscape or entity, the scientific examination of lucidity quickly revealed a more complex, almost frightening truth about the brain's operational capacity. Trained lucid dreamers, instructed by researchers to perform specific motor commands within the dream environment, such as clenching a fist, were monitored via high-density fMRI. The results were revolutionary. When the subject clenched their fist in the dream, the primary motor cortex regions associated with voluntary hand movement in the waking world activated with nearly identical intensity and pattern as if the fist were being clenched in reality. This suggested that the brain, under lucid control, was running the full suite of neural programs for both the dream mode, the visual and narrative construction, and the waking mode, the intended motor action, simultaneously. It is the brain's ultimate, simultaneous operating state, bridging the subjective internal world with the neural pathways of external reality. This dual activation raises profound questions regarding experimental fidelity. If the neural architecture for intense physical action is engaged, what happens when the dream narrative demands intense physical consequence? In 1998, a series of documented cases studied by Stanford researchers focused on lucid dreamers who intentionally induced extreme scenarios, such as free-falling from monumental heights. The physiological response upon simulated impact was not a mild spike, it was a full-blown, life-threatening cascade. Subjects experienced heart rate soaring to 180 beats per minute, precipitous spikes in blood pressure, and in several documented instances, the subject entered a state of profound physiological shock bordering on cardiac arrest. Even more alarmingly, individuals who experienced death within the lucid dream context reported genuine near-death physiological markers, a momentary, authentic shutdown pattern that the body registered as absolute termination. For that brief span, the brain genuinely experienced the cessation of being. This leads to the terrifying recursive query: if the neural substrates for pain, fear, and even death are fully activated by a subjective experience, can the brain, at a fundamental level, truly differentiate between the simulation and the actuality? The scientific consensus, increasingly informed by these physiological data points, leans toward a disturbing answer, perhaps not with absolute certainty. The fundamental circuits of lived experience are functionally identical whether the input source is external sensory data or internally generated, hyperrealistic dream imagery. This deep connectivity also illuminates the overwhelming prevalence of negative affect within the dream world. Analysis reveals that over 70% of dreams across human populations are saturated with negative emotions, fear, anxiety, pursuit, or failure. Why would the biological imperative of an organism, whose primary goal is survival and propagation, mandate a nightly session of self-inflicted psychological torment? The leading contemporary theory posits that dreams, particularly nightmares, are an essential evolutionary survival program. In the ancestral environment, life was defined by immediate, lethal threats, predators, rivals, environmental collapse. Those individuals whose brains compulsively simulated these high-stakes dangers in the safe, controlled environment of sleep, rehearsing escape maneuvers, threat assessment, and social conflict resolution, were better prepared when facing the actual danger. Their genetically advantageous nightmare programming ensured they reacted with greater calm and efficacy, thereby increasing their chances of survival and transmitting those adaptive dreaming genes. This neatly accounts for the near-universal recurrence of dream themes: being chased, predator simulation, falling, gravity and impact rehearsal, or failing an important test, social competence and resource acquisition rehearsal. If dreams are so architecturally crucial, essential for memory encoding, skill consolidation, and threat simulation, why does the conscious self jettison the vast majority of these nightly narratives upon waking? The prevailing protective hypothesis suggests that retaining the entirety of dream experience would be fundamentally destabilizing to conscious reality construction. Imagine waking with a perfect, vivid recall of the heated, personal argument you had with your immediate supervisor in the dream world. The emotional residue and the content of the conflict, though entirely fabricated, would bleed into the waking interaction, rendering functional social relationships impossible. Furthermore, the sheer informational load would be catastrophic. The brain operates with finite storage capacity and processing bandwidth, retaining 10 years' worth of highly detailed, fictionalized, and often contradictory dream narratives would consume the space needed for real-world operational memories, leading to a complete cognitive system collapse, a hard drive utterly clogged with corrupted, irrelevant data files. Forgetting, in this context, is a sophisticated, necessary form of informational hygiene. However, this protection system is not infallible. Rare neurological anomalies, such as a specific form of hyperrecall, cause individuals to remember every dream in hyperrealistic detail, often with greater clarity and emotional impact than waking events. For these individuals, life becomes a perpetual torment, a fluid boundary where the compelling, often terrifying, logic of the dream realm ceaselessly intrudes upon and overwhelms the mundane logic of objective reality. The totality of this research, from the measurable quantum oscillations at 147.8 Hz suggesting space-time permeability, to the functional necessity revealed by memory deprivation, to the physiological reality of shared neural coding between dream and waking states, coalesces around the greatest persistent mystery of human cognition. For thousands of years, dreams were the domain of priests, shamans, and philosophers. Now, they are the subject of advanced physics and neuroscience, yet their fundamental nature remains elusive. Currently, as this analysis unfolds, billions of human minds are suspended in states of profound, internal creation. They are experiencing realities that are wildly divergent from the one shared consensus reality we inhabit. They are enacting impossible physics, witnessing impossible histories, and embracing identities that defy waking constraints. And then, as the alarm sounds or the sun rises, these entire worlds, these decades of simulated experience, evaporate with the fragile ephemerality of a soap bubble bursting in the air. Considering the sheer temporal investment, for an average lifespan of 80 years, one dedicates approximately 60,000 hours to dreaming, equivalent to roughly 10 full years of wakeful existence. The question shifts from mere curiosity to existential imperative. What is the ultimate function of this immense expenditure of neural resources? If the data from 2023 holds true, if the MIT experiment hinted at true multidimensional access, then perhaps consciousness is not confined to the four-dimensional box of the space-time continuum. Perhaps the dreaming mind is routinely engaged in profound interdimensional travel, utilizing those specialized quantum oscillations, the 147.8 Hz key, to briefly unlock access to realities structured by more than our three spatial coordinates, the fourth dimension being merely the necessary pathway for that transition. The concept gains credence when juxtaposed with the mathematical requirements for such transitions, often involving higher dimensional topology where linear time, as we perceive it, becomes merely one axis among many. The dream, then, becomes the mind's native operating environment, the place where the constraints of our localized space-time bubble temporarily loosen their grip. The future trajectory of this research points toward attempts to intentionally synchronize the brain's electrical output with the observed anomalous frequency, aiming not merely to observe precognition or multispatial manifestation, but to engineer controlled, conscious entry into these perceived dimensional cracks. If the brain activity during dreaming is truly producing quantum phenomena that violate local physics, it suggests that dreams are the point of maximum energetic flexibility, the moment when the brain leverages quantum effects, perhaps through orchestrated microjoule dynamics, as some fringe theories propose, or through subtle manipulation of vacuum energy fluctuations, to briefly overcome the decoherence that locks reality into its single, observable path. Should scientists ever stabilize and harness the 147.8 Hz signature, the implications extend far beyond understanding memory. They suggest a technology for navigating the multiverse, where the dreamer becomes the ultimate explorer, using the very act of consciousness as the vehicle. Thus, the quiet, internal drama played out nightly across the sleeping world is perhaps not a simple biological necessity, but the grandest, most continuous interdimensional journey humanity undertakes, all while securely anchored to the pillow, awaiting the dawn to usher them back into the constrained reality they mistakenly believe to be the whole of existence. The next time the descent into sleep occurs, the self should regard the transition not as a retreat from the world, but as the activation sequence for the most extraordinary phenomenon in the known, or perhaps, the unknown universe.